In the spring of 1888, on a flood-prone flat of clay along the Ohio riverbank called Black Mud Bend, while every neighbor hauled timber, stacked sandbags and reinforced wooden levees against the swelling thaw, one man stood knee-deep in the cold mud and dug ditches. Not straight trenches to the river the way a drainage ditch was supposed to run, but winding, stepped, broken, wrong. The flatboat men who drifted past lowered their poles to watch. Nobody understood why. Nobody asked. They only remembered his name when the water finally came. His name was Caleb Vance. He was 46 and he lived alone but for an old one-eared hound that never left his shadow. Behind his cabin lay a small, sunken mound overgrown with wild briars, and a pair of child's iron boots still sat dry beneath the hearth, coated in years of undisturbed dust. He spoke only when spoken to. When the mill owner weighed his grain, Vance would nod once and take his sack. He asked for no favours. He asked for no help. Men who have buried their tomorrows learn to keep their hands bleeding in the present, and his shovel never rested. 84 channels that first month, cut deep into the hardpan clay, narrow arcs, shallow terraces, strange dead-end pockets that seemed to loop back onto themselves like a coiled snake. He measured each cut with a notched hickory staff, stepped 6 paces, dug and moved on, the hound watching from the turned spoil. The town boys threw river rocks at his boots and called him the Gully Fool. The name spread across Black Mud Bend before the ice even broke on the upper fork. A man digging holes in dry dirt where no water stood, a man carving traps around a cabin that would wash into the Mississippi by April anyway. Garrett Cross said as much at the dry goods store, and Cross was a man with weight in his voice. 52 years old, owner of the valley's only steam sawmill, and holding 3 mortgages on Vance's parcel, because a limestone gravel bank sat behind the cabin that Cross wanted for his kiln. Water needs a wall, not a scratch in the dirt, Cross told the men on the porch. You put pine planks 3 inches thick, pack river clay behind them, and you brace it with white oak. That's how you turn a river. Even the master stonemason, Abel Pruitt, who had laid the bridge piers at the county seat, agreed. Loose earth washes away in the first 10 minutes of a crest. The man is digging his own cellar grave. Their logic was sound. Vance gave them no debate, no defence, no glance. He bought his extra spade heads, walked 3 miles back into the bottoms, and kept digging. He had learned it 15 years earlier from a dying canal engineer, a Frenchman who had spent 3 decades fighting water across the swamps of the territory before swamp fever took his lungs. The engineer had coughed blood into a rag, pointed a trembling finger at the river map, and rasped, "Water is a bull, Vance. You put a stone wall in front of a charging bull, and it shatters the stone or it piles over the top until the foundation rots beneath. But give the bull 20 doors to run through. Make each path turn at a sharp angle. Make it climb 2 inches, then drop 2 inches, and by the 3rd turn, the beast has lost its legs. The flood only destroys what refuses to let it pass." Vance had never forgotten the voice. He built his entire labyrinth of mud around those dying words. The work ground him to bone. He rose before the fog lifted from the bottomland and shovelled until his shoulders seized. Young Toby Miller, the blacksmith's orphaned nephew, 13 and hollow-cheeked, began wheeling barrows of loose silt for him without asking for a copper, and the one-eared hound began walking the boy home every dusk. The 3 of them worked in absolute silence. Only once did the boy lean on his spade and ask, "Why do these ditches stop before they reach the creek?" Vance looked at the grey water moving beyond the willow line. Because if you give the river an open road, it runs right to your door. If you give it a maze, it forgets where it was going. Then he drove his blade back into the clay. The first high water came in mid-April, when the upper mountain snows melted under a sudden warm rain. A flash crest broke over the bend's natural levee. The brown surge smashed through Vance's outer tier, washing out 3 terraces and collapsing 60 yards of ditch wall into a soup of mud. Cross stood on his fortified timber embankment across the creek, laughing with his mill hands. "Look at your ditches now, Vance. Silt took 'em before the river even reached the 2nd mark." Vance walked the muddy flats at daylight, saying nothing. He didn't rebuild what broke. He studied the silt trails. He saw where the current had gained speed through the wide entryways and how it had carved straight channels through his square turns. So he recut the trenches narrower at the front, angled the diversion pockets at 60 degrees instead of 90, and lined the corners with heavy river stones he hauled on his back from the quarry. He broke the current's momentum before it ever saw his walls. It cost him 4 days of unbroken labour and 2 blistered, bleeding heels. Cross watched from his high porch through a brass spyglass. Cross did not laugh this time. Old man Coulter did the strangest thing of all. Coulter was 74. He had survived the great inundation of 54, had watched 2 river towns vanish off the state map, and could smell a flash flood 3 days before the clouds formed. The entire county treated his word on the river like holy writ. One pale Tuesday morning, Coulter tied his mule to Vance's fence, stepped over the ditch network, and walked the channels in silence. He stopped in the middle loop where the terraces curved back toward the swamp hollow. He dropped a handful of dry dirt into the trough, watched the dust settle in the dead air, and knelt to run his aged hand along the stone-packed corners. He mounted his mule, looked down at Vance for 3 long seconds without uttering a syllable, and rode away. He didn't say a word at the tavern that night. By the second week of May, the one-eared hound refused to go out into the yard. It lay beneath the kitchen table, head flat on its paws, trembling at a low vibration moving through the bedrock that no man could feel. The rain started on a Thursday. Not drops, but a solid sheet of grey slate that erased the tree line. Coulter stood on his porch 5 miles upriver, watched the brown foam rising on the bridge piles, and told his sons, "The river isn't rising. It's coming to take the valley back." Vance checked his stones one last time in the downpour, unlatched his door for Toby, who came running through the rising bottoms drenched and terrified, and pulled the iron bolt shut. The levee breached at 2 in the morning. A 12-foot wall of black river water tore through the bend at 30 knots, carrying whole oak trees and drowned livestock like matchsticks. At Garrett Cross's compound, the strongest timber bulwark in the territory, the raging current hit the solid wall with the force of an artillery shell. The water had nowhere to bleed. It backed up against the oak beams until the immense pressure blew the foundation out from beneath. Cross's family fled to the attic in the dark, watching $10,000 in sawn timber and dry goods drift into the night as water rose to their waistboards. Out on Vance's crooked shelf of land, the brown wave slammed into the first stone diversion. The water split. It entered the narrow channels, rushed left, hit the angled stone baffles, and lost its velocity. It surged into the second terrace, circled the reverse loops, and dumped its heavy silt into the dead pockets exactly where Vance had hollowed them out. By the time the river touched the cabin's bottom log, it was barely 6 inches of brown water, lapping against the timber like a gentle pond. Inside, the lamp stayed lit. The boy Toby sat dry by the hearth, reading an old almanac. The hound slept. Vance cracked the door open an inch, looked out at 5 acres of raging river tamed into winding ribbons of slow mud, and pushed the bolt back into place. He did not smile. He only sat down in his rocking chair, closed his eyes, and took his first full breath in 10 years. When the floodwaters receded 4 days later, Cross walked down the mud-slick road in ruined boots, expecting to find Vance's cabin swept clean into the delta. Instead, he found the cabin bone dry. The boy was sitting on the stoop sharpening a plane blade, the hound was basking in the sun, and the man who had lost his whole world once stood in the yard, quietly clearing silt from his stone channels so they would be ready for next year. Cross stood at the fence line for a long time. "I built against the water," Cross said, his voice cracked. "You gave it a place to bleed." Vance said nothing. He simply tossed another shovelful of silt into the barrow. By the following summer, 12 homesteads across the bend were digging diversion channels. By 1892, the state engineers mapped the basin and called them contour spillways. Caleb Vance never claimed to have fought the river. He just understood that you don't stop a flood with pride. You teach it to run in circles until it runs out of breath. If you enjoyed the video, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, do you think Vance was a hidden genius? Or did it take losing everything he loved to make him finally pay attention to how nature moves?